Moscow, 1978. The air in the small, dimly lit apartment was thick with the smell of developing fluid. Inside the bathroom, turned into a makeshift darkroom, a man worked with practiced, quiet concentration. Negatives hung like dark, wet secrets over a wash basin, the visual record of another mission now captured forever in silver halide. This man was Viktor Alexeyev, a mid-level KGB surveillance operative stationed in East Berlin, codename Falcon. For years, his hands had handled the most crucial technical data of the Cold War. He was a master of the covert 35mm camera, trained by the KGB's elite Department 12 to document every movement, every license plate, every subtle shift in the enemy's operational patterns. His trade was observation, his tool was a lens. But on this particular night, as he held a freshly developed strip of film up to the low-wattage safety light, one frame stood out. It was a photograph of a doorway, familiar, slightly out of focus, framed with the meticulous composition he always used. He stared at it, a slow realization dawning. It wasn't a target's door, it was his own. This was the ultimate pattern interrupt. A spy, trained to photograph the enemy, had unknowingly captured the first visual evidence of his own final catastrophic vulnerability. These photographs, meant for Moscow's secret archives, intended to fuel the Soviet intelligence machine, would instead become the key piece of evidence in his own eventual trial. They were the visual diary of a man unknowingly recording his own downfall, a series of precise technical measurements that would ultimately expose not his target, but himself. This roll of film was the definitive proof that even the most meticulous observer can fail to see the geometry of his own exposure. To grasp the precision of Alexeyev's downfall, one must first understand the technical obsession of Cold War intelligence. In the 1970s, information warfare was fought on 35mm film. The KGB's Department 12 was the master architect of this trade, training agents like Alexeyev to operate tiny covert cameras, mechanisms disguised within fountain pens, coat buttons, and cigarette cases. Their mandate was rigorous: capture movements, log plate numbers, and document the architectural layout of Western safehouses. Alexeyev was exceptionally skilled at this mechanical deception. He possessed a forensic eye for detail and composition. His photographs were meticulously framed, transforming mundane street scenes into critical intelligence case studies. His work was often circulated in Moscow's intelligence schools as the benchmark for operational photography. His private obsession, however, was his technical advantage. He favored a customized Zenit E camera with a sharp 50mm Industar lens, and he went to extreme lengths to smuggle rolls of high-quality Kodak 400 film through the East Berlin black market. This was his personal logbook, his private film archive, a habit that mixed crucial mission data with moments from his private life, a professional risk disguised as personal meticulousness. He believed the camera was an extension of his own observational skill, a perfect, unblinking witness. But by documenting every mission with such obsessive rigor, he was unconsciously creating the blueprint for his own identification. He photographed everything the system demanded and everything his curiosity noticed, except the eyes of the system watching him. The mission that delivered the key evidence began like any other, taking place under the shadow of the Berlin Wall. Alexeyev was tasked with following a suspected double agent who was known to shuttle between East and West, an unstable conduit of information. The sequence of his pursuit was a masterclass in field surveillance. He tracked his target through the visual static of West Berlin, shadow scenes in bustling train stations, quiet, tense moments in crowded cafes, and quick dashes through forgotten back alleys. The only sound was the almost inaudible click of his covert camera, mechanically capturing a timeline of betrayal. He returned to his safe house that night, his work seemingly complete. In the familiar red glow of his darkroom, he developed the single, precious roll. As the images resolved in the fixer, he scrutinized the final frames. They showed his target entering a nondescript building that Alexeyev did not immediately recognize from his briefings, a tiny, critical piece of unexpected data. He filed the film, noting the coordinates, and sealed the roll in its protective sleeve. What Alexeyev did not know, and what his lens did not reveal, was that the building was not just a random drop site, it was an active, undercover CIA listening post. By capturing the target entering that location, Alexeyev had also, by proximity, visually implicated himself in the entire enemy network. He had unknowingly placed himself on the same strip of film as the very intelligence network he was fighting, moving from the anonymous observer to a documented participant. The initial rolls of film Alexeyev submitted regarding the West Berlin double agent were meticulously logged and archived, seemingly another technical triumph for Department 12. But weeks later, as is the nature of intelligence, the data was subjected to a second, more critical review by a counterintelligence analyst in Moscow, a team looking not for targets, but for inconsistencies. This was the moment the geometry of Alexeyev's tradecraft turned against him. It happened in the silent scrutiny of a projected negative. One analyst, reviewing a photograph of a polished glass door, noticed a strange, blurred shape in the reflection. It wasn't the target. It was a ghost. A faint, distorted face framed by the unmistakable outline of a camera held to the eye. It was Viktor Alexeyev himself. The analyst brought the image into high-contrast focus, measuring the angle of incidence. The officer realized Alexeyev had framed his own reflection, without realizing it. This single frame, this accidental self-portrait, was the key anomaly. They re-examined hundreds of his previous mission roles, looking for the telltale signature of an observer obsessed with documentation. The pattern soon became damning. In photos showing targets exiting train cars, a distinct shadow fell across the concrete, Alexeyev's silhouette. In wide-angle shots of street corners, a faint, dark figure stood at a consistent distance, always in the margin of the frame. In one specific image, frame 36A, the light refraction angle was precisely 32 degrees, confirming the height and position of the photographer at the moment the shutter dropped. The accumulation of these small technical flaws created a revelation identical to the one that exposed the Cuban missile sites. A perfect pattern generated by an expert, revealing a truth he never intended to show. Alexeyev's obsessive dedication to meticulous technical record-keeping had not only created a perfect history of his targets, but also a hidden, unintentional history of his own movements. He had supplied the KGB with the visual evidence required to bring him down. The analyst reported that the problem wasn't the target. The problem was the man holding the camera. The revelation of the self-exposure was too serious to be handled at the departmental level. Alexeyev was recalled to KGB headquarters in Moscow, not for a commendation, but for a confrontation. He was brought into a sterile, windowless projection room. The only light emanated from a high-powered projector fixed onto a stark white wall. The briefing officer, a colonel with cold, assessing eyes, did not offer a handshake or a greeting. Instead, the first image flashed onto the screen, the photograph of the West Berlin CIA listening post. The colonel began with a technical dissection. "This is your work, Falcon. Meticulous. Precise. The coordinates are confirmed. The target is confirmed. The composition, flawless. You are perhaps the best photographer Department 12 has ever produced, which is why this next image is so disturbing." The image clicked forward. It was the high-contrast zoom of the reflection in the glass door. Alexeyev stared at his own blurred face, the telltale shape of the Zenit E held close to his eye. The evidence was presented with brutal scientific objectivity. The officer's voice was hard, cutting through the silence of the room. "We did not find this reflection by accident. We looked for it, and when we found it, we began looking for patterns of exposure. Your exposure. We have two possibilities, Alexeyev. 1. You are simply guilty of the sloppiest tradecraft imaginable. 2. You are a double agent, intentionally exposing our operational presence and creating an archive that would make your betrayal undeniable." Alexeyev, trained to remain composed, felt a sudden, profound disorientation. His entire career was built on observation, yet he was being destroyed by it. He protested fiercely. "Comrade Colonel, this is absurd. I document everything. That is my job. You taught me that a meticulous archive protects the mission. I am a photographer. If I see a compelling composition, I take the shot. The camera is my eye. It sees everything, even when I do not consciously process it." The colonel scoffed, moving to a detailed sequence of slides. Your artistry is your undoing. Let us look at your archive not as art, but as a flight path. The projection shifted to a composite. On the left was a grainy photograph Alexeyev took of a park bench in 1976. On the right was an overlay of a city map. Dots representing known CIA operative movements from that year were superimposed. The colonel pointed to a red dot near the park bench. You claimed you were monitoring traffic flow at that time, but records show a CIA field officer was present at this location conducting a dead drop 10 minutes after you took your picture. You framed the shot not for traffic, but to capture the light falling on the path where the drop was made. A second slide appeared, a photograph Alexeyev took of a street sign, perfectly centered. Again, the map overlay showed a concentration of Western surveillance assets converging on that exact block. You captured a street sign, Victor. Why? It is not intel, it is administrative. Unless you framed it to give the West photographic proof that we knew the location of their assets. The colonel accelerated, each slide clicking like a hammer blow. The accumulated data transcended mere technical error. Alexeyev's supposed artistry in framing was systematically interpreted as evidence of calculated betrayal. His obsession with detail, the perfect light, the compelling shadow, was recast as a deliberate attempt to create a complete, authenticated record for his Western handlers. The core of the accusation rested on the concept of intentional self-incrimination. Why would an agent so brilliant, so meticulous, make such elementary errors in reflection and silhouette? The KGB's logic was relentless. The error was too perfect to be accidental. It must be intentional. Alexeyev was not just documenting his mission. He was creating a visual breadcrumb trail for the West to confirm his own value as a double agent. The colonel leaned in, his face obscured by the sudden brightness of a white slide. Observation becomes self-incrimination when the observer knows the map better than the mission. You documented our movements by documenting the Western reaction to your presence. When does observation become self-incrimination, Alexeyev? When the camera shows a truth that the man refuses to admit. The question was rhetorical, but the weight of the projection room, filled with the shadows of his own photos, was overwhelming. His own perfect archive was now the most compelling evidence against him. The interrogation would not rely on confession, but on the cold, mathematical certainty provided by his own film rolls. The technical evidence was deemed irrefutable, and the psychological framework was set. Alexeyev's skill was not a shield, it was the weapon used to destroy him. The verbal confrontation in the projection room was only the psychological test. The final definitive trial had to be based on verifiable geographic data, a literal rewalking of the path of betrayal. The KGB ordered a full ground-level verification of the claims, treating Alexeyev's movements not as a string of assignments, but as a massive statistical experiment designed to eliminate the possibility of random chance. The core hypothesis was simple. If Alexeyev was truly a double agent, his photographic lapses would coincide with active Western operational areas at a rate far exceeding statistical probability. Specialized KGB field teams, drawn from the same Department 12 that had trained Alexeyev, were dispatched back to East Berlin. They were given printouts of his photographs, precise timestamps, and the coordinates extracted from the backgrounds of his images. Their task was to meticulously retrace his operational routes, comparing Alexeyev's movements against a deep archive of previously separate intelligence feeds, Western radio chatter logs, known CIA safehouse usage schedules, and even the subtle movement patterns of Western diplomatic vehicles. This was intelligence turned into geometric proof. The KGB analysts converted Alexeyev's meticulous photographic composition, the artistic framing he had been so proud of, into hard, actionable geographical data points. They measured not the beauty of the light, but the distance between Alexeyev's recorded position and known enemy activity. The theory was that Alexeyev, knowingly or unknowingly, was drawn to the tension in the air, the subtle shift in human geometry that precedes a spy action. His lens was attracted to the very spots the West was prioritizing. The results, delivered back to Moscow, were definitive, cold, and damning. The statistical analysis of Alexeyev's locations over the last 18 months, painted a pattern that ruled out coincidence. The report stated with chilling bureaucratic precision 12 of 18 recorded sightings that Alexeyev had classified as routine surveillance occurred within the same 500-meter radius as known Western contacts and dead drops during their operational windows. This number, a 2/3 correlation, was the numerical execution of Viktor Alexeyev. In the world of high-stakes espionage, a 2/3 correlation of this nature was not bad luck. It was proof of calculated intent. It meant Alexeyev's artistic pursuit of the perfect composition consistently led him to the exact geographical nexus of the enemy's most sensitive operations. The shadow and the reflection were no longer accidents of light. They were deliberate, if unconscious, markers of confirmation for his Western handlers. The verification process had verified the KGB's darkest suspicion. They had statistically proven that Alexeyev was either a profoundly compromised asset or a dedicated double agent who had cleverly disguised his photographic confessions as professional diligence. The repetition of the pattern was the final layer of guilt. An isolated reflection is an error. A pattern of shadows consistently falling within a 500-meter kill zone of Western intelligence is a map of betrayal. The order was swift and terminal. Having failed the statistical trial, Viktor Alexeyev was formally detained by the 9th Directorate of the KGB. The arrest was quiet, clean and clinical, a final echo of the precise tradecraft he himself had mastered. The last item confiscated from him, treated with the reverence usually reserved for the most sensitive intelligence documents, was his beloved Zenit E camera. It was cold to the touch and still loaded. It contained one final unrevealed roll of film, the visual confession of his capture, yet to be seen. The true moment of irreversible proof arrived not through confession or statistical analysis, but from the last, unexposed roll of film confiscated during his detention. This final sequence was the visual confirmation of the KGB's entire statistical hypothesis. In a makeshift darkroom adjoining the interrogation facility, the colonel and 2 analysts watched in complete silence as the last length of 35mm film was carefully submerged into the fixer. The tension was palpable. This was the final, definitive test of Alexeyev's loyalty. Frame by frame, the images resolved. They showed a series of mundane street views, followed by a sequence of Alexeyev entering a crumbling, abandoned flat, a site he claimed was a prearranged rendezvous point with a Soviet handler. The analysts checked the coordinates against their current data. The flat was genuine, but the supposed Soviet handler never arrived. The colonel gave a grim nod of satisfaction. The sequence confirmed Alexeyev's movements right up to his arrest. But the final 2 frames contained the dramatic spike, the action moment that sealed the case. The penultimate photograph was slightly blurred, taken in a frantic, hurried moment just as Alexeyev stepped through the doorway of the abandoned flat. But in the background, a figure was frozen in motion. A man standing across the street, wearing a deceptively neutral, unmarked coat and sporting a distinctive Western haircut, a style immediately recognized by the KGB as non-Soviet. He was looking directly at the camera's lens, not with surprise but with confirmation. This was not Alexeyev's Soviet handler. This was the CIA field agent, the real recipient of the photographic archive, who was observing the final confirmation of the asset's successful entry into the meeting point. The colonel gripped the desk, a silent, furious confirmation of betrayal written on his face. Alexeyev's final act of documentation, the habit he could not break, had been to record the presence of his enemy handler moments before the Soviet net closed in. The camera, his trusted professional eye, had performed its final, brutal service. It documented the last moment of his freedom and visually authenticated the existence of his American connection. The confirmation was immediate and public. Just hours after Alexeyev's detention and the development of that final role, Western intelligence agencies, using carefully worded diplomatic channels, announced the capture of a Soviet field photographer in East Berlin, a clear, calculated signal to Moscow. The announcement was a calculated piece of propaganda designed to confirm that Alexeyev had been a crucial Western asset whose absence would now be felt. The information captured in Alexeyev's camera became the foundation of his value to the West, used as immediate propaganda against the very system he worked for. Alexeyev's obsession with documentation had created a perfect high-contrast image reveal. The final photograph, exposing the Western agent, simultaneously exposed Alexeyev himself to the KGB. He had literally captured his own capture. The case of Viktor Alexeyev, codename Falcon, was immediately classified at the highest level, transforming from a case file into an internal cautionary tale, now infamously known within the Directorate as the Falcon fallacy. The strategic impact was immediate and twofold, forcing a complete overhaul of KGB Department 12 protocols. The entire photographic doctrine was rewritten. The key takeaway was brutal. Personal obsession compromises the system. The KGB issued sweeping new tradecraft regulations, the Alexeyev Doctrine, that strictly prohibited any personal photography by field operatives. No private film archives were permitted. Every single roll of film, whether mission-related or not, had to be immediately submitted for unvetted processing. They taught that the shadow, the reflection, and the compulsion to create an artistic frame were now considered vectors of unacceptable risk. The Soviet system recognized that the human element of self-expression, disguised as professional rigor, was the fatal flaw in the machine. Ironically, the CIA adopted the opposite lesson. They immediately began reverse engineering Alexeyev's downfall. If the KGB was training its agents not to leave self-revealing photo traces, the CIA began aggressively hunting for them in intercepted enemy intelligence. They used Alexeyev's statistical failure, the 500-meter proximity rate, as a template to detect other potential moles. They realized that an agent's meticulousness was a sign not just of discipline, but of self-documentation, and that the technical compulsion to achieve the perfect frame could be used to expose the author. Thus, one man's inability to turn off his camera completely redefined Cold War surveillance procedures on both sides. The KGB learned to fear the artistic eye of its own agents, while the CIA learned to exploit the subtle physical geometry of the observer's shadow. Alexeyev's mistake was scaled up and diffused, becoming an integral, unspoken lesson in every espionage training manual. By 1980, the institutional response to the Falcon fallacy was fully integrated into the Soviet intelligence apparatus. The KGB didn't just retrain agents, they rewrote the foundational geometry of field surveillance. Self-exposure risk analysis became a mandatory component of the curriculum for every new operative. Trainees were forced to study Alexeyev's photographs not as examples of excellent work, but as a blueprint for institutional failure, learning to spot the inadvertent signature of the observer. The impact manifested in a physical transformation of the KGB training manuals. Entire sections, which once extolled the virtues of thorough documentation, were replaced with warnings about the compulsive archive. The new protocols strictly mandated that any field photographer who demonstrated a consistent artistic bias, a preference for complex compositions or evocative light, was to be immediately flagged for psychological assessment. The Soviet Union had effectively institutionalized the belief that the perfect spy was the one who did not care about the photograph, only the data it contained. Meanwhile, the West continued to prove the promise of Alexeyev's archive decades later. As the Cold War thawed and certain documents were declassified, intelligence agencies strategically released fragments of the story. They didn't publish the damning statistical analysis proving Alexeyev was a technical liability. Instead, they used his own visually stunning, meticulous photography, his art, to craft a narrative of a Soviet defector who was secretly collecting evidence for the West. The final irony, Alexeyev's betrayal, became a propaganda tool, solidifying the legend of the spy who captured his own capture in the Western psyche, transforming his technical compulsion into a heroic act of political documentation. The legend of Viktor Alexeyev is pervasive, often simplified by enthusiasts into the myth that he was a hardened double agent caught with irrefutable written proof of treason. This narrative, largely fueled by Western-spun declassifications, misses the crucial, more profound truth. Alexeyev was likely not a traitor driven by political ideology, but a victim of his own uncompromising professional excellence. The cold evidence suggests he was simply too good at his job, too meticulous, too reliant on his camera as an extension of his own vision. His downfall was not an intentional act of political rebellion. It was a devastating human flaw inside a perfect system. His fate was sealed the moment his obsession with documenting everything overrode the discipline of remaining unseen. His perfection became his confession. Viktor Alexeyev's ultimate legacy is a terrifying lesson in the psychological cost of the spy's trade. He was a man who saw the world only through a 50mm lens, and in doing so, he developed the ultimate blind spot: himself. His camera, which had recorded thousands of secrets, ultimately held only one truth that mattered: the geometry of his own exposure. The final image, preserved in the KGB archives, is a testament to this paradox. It's not the sharp photograph of the CIA agent, but the blurry, accidental self-portrait in the reflection of the glass door. A face, half shadow, half light, framed by the familiar, heavy silhouette of his beloved Zenit E. It is the definitive image of a man whose tool of vision became the instrument of his downfall. His story remains the ultimate whisper in the halls of every intelligence service. For a man trained to see everything, his only blind spot was himself.